and good evening. My name is Ellen Nightingale. I am a collaborative lawyer. I am delighted to be the moderator of a panel discussion this evening about marriage contracts and cohabitation agreements. Is there a better way to do them? Or as the shout out on the website, why would we even want to do them? The pressures of society changing may have disrupted the established patterns of marriage, not to mention the acceptance of cohabitation without marriage, but love remains as powerful as ever. Many couples are no longer saying "till death do us part." They're making up their own conditional standard of commitment, like "as long as we love." I'd like to introduce the members of our panel for this evening. To my immediate left, JJ, Jean-Jacques, we know him as JJ Paquette, is a lawyer who was called in 1980 and has always practiced in Sudbury in a two-man firm. He has chaired Collaborative Practice Sudbury. JJ sits as a board member of the Ontario Collaborative Practice Federation, to get used to that, OCPF. And most importantly, JJ has come down from Sudbury this afternoon to sit on our panel this evening. Thank you, JJ. Next to JJ is Lori Stein, who may be known to many of you. Lori is a family professional. Lori works with clients and lawyers, both in individual and in joint meetings. She works with parents to create parenting plans. She facilitates larger team meetings. And Lori has trained widely in the Ontario collaborative community as a trainer. She's also a faculty member with the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, the IACP. Welcome and thank you. And to my far left, Vivian Alterman. Vivian is the financial professional at our table this evening. Vivian is a founding partner of AP Valuations Limited, a boutique valuation firm specializing in matrimonial and other litigation matters. Now, I say this only because this is in the bio and must be supposed to be shared. Vivian is a CBV, a chartered business valuator, who in 1997 achieved the highest mark in Canada.
First of all, you gave away my age, which is
It's like, here, what do you want me to do with this? And is also a chartered accountant. Vivian is a consultant to DivorceMate Software on the Spousal Support Advisory Guidelines, which I didn't know. A very active member in the collaborative community, a recent former chair of Collaborative Practice Toronto, and like all of our esteemed panelists, a very busy member of collaborative teams in the province. So, panel. As couples are reacting to the reality and trauma of divorce, together with the prevalence of economic uncertainty, they are seeking a path for a very possible transition from romance to reality. As collaborative professionals, why consider using the collaborative process to negotiate these agreements?
So I thought of this question from a collaborative perspective. So clients do want marriage contracts. They want cohabitation agreements. What can we provide? And by that I'm really thinking, what's the added value? Is there something we can bring more to the table than they would otherwise have? This is an area which is has a high level of risk of negligence claims for lawyers. It's fundamentally a very difficult thing to do. So I've been a lawyer since 1980, and I'm trying to think of how many conferences I've been, or CPD, where people haven't told us to buy more insurance and to charge more because you will likely get sued. You know, we have a lot to bring to the table, because I'm thinking you get sued when somebody resiles from their agreement. And they do that very rarely when they've bought into the agreement, felt like they were heard, and the agreement actually addresses their needs, their emotional, their legal, and their financial needs. Sounds like what we do in a separation agreement. And we're very comfortable doing it there. And we should be doing it. We should be embracing it, because we can give, certainly as lawyers, with the help of the other professionals, we can deliver a reliable, well-negotiated contract. I like to think, and I actually believe, that we can do a lot more. And what we can do more is provide our clients with building blocks for their relationship, successful relationship. So we can negotiate an agreement which actually sets a crack in the foundation of their relationship if we're hardball, by we, I'm now talking about lawyers, if we are hardball negotiating, treating each other as adversaries. We can start to develop a crack in the relationship, or we can turn to our trusted neutrals, our family professionals and our financial professionals, who know probably more than we do, definitely know more about what are the positive building blocks that people can use for their relationship, and thereby substantially reduce the risk, or at least have some impact of reducing the risk of the relationship falling apart. And if it does, they now have tools, and they've learned to listen to each other, and they've learned to consider the other person's point of view. That's huge. And when you do that, I think you're less likely to resile from your agreement, or you're less likely to sue when you have a problem.
Thank you. I think about, as a family professional, I think about failure as the dissolution of the relationship or the marriage at this point. So I don't think of it as, it's a personal liability about getting sued, which is a very real concern for lawyers. For us, it's about it falling apart before it really even begins. And so I think that when we begin to talk about how to negotiate marriage contracts before or after marriage, right? Sometimes they're sort of post-nups or prenups. You're beginning to conceptualize the concept of family. And so you're negotiating something that actually helps you to look at your idea of family. You are talking about what might happen upon the dissolution of your marriage at the very same time that you are going into a ritual where you are going to promise to take care of each other. And so unless we pull together that this being a contract that works for the family and that the family defines what that is, I think that that's a very big risk that we fall into if we don't consider those things. So that the idea of what we value together is this contract. And it's not just about protecting property, which is usually a big one, but why are we engaging in it? How does it help our family? And how does it help pull us together? Otherwise, you're not going to be signing any contract of any kind.
I think also the team together in a room around a table gives an opportunity to educate the clients. So it gives them an opportunity from a financial perspective to educate the clients about what the assets are, what the liabilities are, making sure that everyone around the table is using a common language. So when we're talking about assets, or we're talking about debts, or we're talking about what goes in the pot and what doesn't go in the pot, it gives everybody an opportunity to understand what is it that we're talking about, an opportunity to educate, and to make sure that everyone's in the same place.
So to follow up on that quickly, why do you think these agreements are challenged so often and successfully so often? And even if it doesn't get to trial, more often than not, the fact that the action was started will result in a settlement that is more than the parties expected was going to happen at the end of a relationship or a marriage. So why do you think the challenge? What is going wrong in the old way of doing these? Do you have thoughts on that? For instance, are we negotiating them too close to the date of marriage so that there's the specter of duress? What about ILA and lawyers who just do ILA with no bargaining and no negotiating? Anyone have any ideas? Do people put enough time into these? Do they care? Do they trust?
So clearly, some lawyers make bad deals. Some clients are actually okay with bad deals, and they would rather have a bad deal than no deal at all, and say, well, I'll worry about it later, because you can tell them this isn't worth the paper it's written on. That's okay. I'm fine with that, the client might say. And then it gets litigated. So, or chances are it will be. So some of these deals are exactly that problem. People are pushed into it. You go back to basic contract law. Sometimes there's no consideration, frankly. One person just gave up everything and got nothing in exchange. And then we'd be surprised. Who can be surprised that that deal won't stand? It doesn't meet the client's needs, and no real attempt was made to meet the client's needs. So what's the lesson? The lesson, as in the other courses we take, is due diligence. Take your time, meet with the people, obtain the concerns, document your file. But there's so much more we can do on the collaborative side. And we have protocols. We should follow them. We should enter in this, well, we should follow the collaborative process. And as you go through that process, you are checking off all of the items they tell you in your negligence courses, in your CPD course. Oh yeah, did that, spent the amount. So there's a convergence here that definitely, if you follow the collaborative process, your agreement has a good chance to stand. And again, we can do more.
I think that when the contract is negotiated too close to the date, it undoubtedly unearths vulnerabilities that the couple haven't anticipated, and it creates this fissure in the relationship that is terrifying and is unsettling, and goes against the very grain of what they're about to embark into. And I think that they push through it in the hopes that it will come out okay at the other end. But these kinds of things are, any time that we gloss over something that is a significant issue is going to show up on the other side. So I think that you need to have a substantial amount of time to go through these vulnerabilities that will inevitably show up during difficult and very sensitive negotiations about how we take care of one another.
I think disclosure is the one thing that comes to mind when you talk about, why do they fall apart? Financial disclosure. And I always ask myself, how much disclosure is enough? Is a financial statement enough at one end of the spectrum, or even perhaps not even a financial statement, just a number on a piece of paper? And then on the other side, do you need a comprehensive valuation? And how much time is that going to take if these people are planning to get married? And who decides how much disclosure is enough? And is it enough to say, and I've seen it in some marriage contracts, the assets are greater than 20 million? Is that enough? And then when they are challenged, do we need to value the assets going back to the date of marriage to compare if greater than 20 million was enough or wasn't enough? And these are all good discussions that you can have when everyone's around the table. How much disclosure is enough? How much work do we want to put into this? What's the cost? What's the benefit? So I think it's really important to have those difficult conversations with everyone around the table, instead of in a more traditional approach where you'll have, lawyer and client in one room and then lawyer and client in another room, and then they're just going back and forth, and those discussions aren't had, and the implications of the discussions aren't had.
Vivian, you do a significant amount of litigation in the challenge part of these agreements after the relationship goes sideways. Is there any reason not to require the same level of financial disclosure for one of these kinds of contracts as would be the norm in a separation agreement? And what are courts doing with statements of net worth that make approximate valuations, which would never be sufficient in the negotiation of a separation agreement? Is this one of the protocols in a collaborative marriage contract that we should now be following?
I don't know what the courts are doing. That's beyond sort of my area of expertise. What I find is that when we're doing work for a marriage contract, we're always recommending that you value the businesses, right? That if you're doing a separation agreement, you're going to do a valuation. If you're doing a marriage contract, you do a valuation. It's the due diligence that you need to make sure that you've included the proper disclosure. That's our point of view. I don't really know what the courts are doing. One of the things that I always say is you can't sort of set up an organization structure, do a valuation, do a marriage contract, and then never look at it again. I think one of the things that needs to be included in these protocols are these constant reviews, because a lot of the marriage contracts that show up sort of at my desk, I'm asked to look at, and they say, well, at the date of marriage, they had a holdco and an opco, and at the date that they're breaking up, they've got a complete different asset, but the husband is saying it's the same one that's excluded under the marriage contract. And part of the difficulty is that a marriage can be a long period of time, and in between that period of time, there's a lot of corporate reorganizations, there's a lot of state freezes, there's a lot of name changes. So what happens is, by the time you're looking at this marriage contract, what was excluded may not look the same as what exists at the date of separation. So I always say, if we're getting into this marriage contract, make sure that the corporate lawyer, the corporate accountant is aware that you're entering into this marriage contract, and that it's reviewed at every point in time. Every time there's going to be a corporate reorganization, at that point in time, the marriage contract needs to be pulled out, and maybe it needs to be re-signed. And in a setting that isn't collaborative, I think that's a more difficult concept to follow through, right? You're going to pull out the marriage contract 5 years and say, we need to re-sign this, honey. But I think in a collaborative where you've worked together to put this contract together, I think it's an easier sell.
So the hair on the back of my neck is standing up because I'm picturing, I'm picturing, sort of him leaning over to her in bed and going, sweetheart, it's time to sign that thing again, baby. And I'm like, okay, so if we're going to do that and it's necessary, then you need to be addressing that first up and be talking about why it's so important and why we agree to it and how it fits with our family values, and it's going to show up when required, but that this isn't new and that we agree to it, and this is a process that we understand, however awkward.
But that's exactly what I mean. If it's agreed to up front, and it isn't the husband leaning over and say, honey, or the wife leaning over and saying, honey, it's more of, it comes from the corporate lawyer and the corporate accountant saying, we've done this corporate reorganization, and as part of that, these documents need to be signed, and this one needs to be signed too.
I'm wondering how awkward So Lori tells me really awkward. Okay, so if when we're negotiating the contract, we're also looking at, I tend to think of it as a financial plan for the day when we're no longer under the same roof. And we're at the initial drafting, we're watching out for each other. I would think that's part of the financial plan, that is to say, part of the goal is that the financial plan will be caring for both parties. So I would like to see this as a positive process where the clients want to come back and want to make sure that everything is on track and their financial plan and their, as importantly, their family plan is being addressed and maintained.
I love your offer.
We're actually going to come back to that in a moment. One of the reasons that we invited JJ to participate in this panel is because JJ has begun crafting these kinds of agreements more like collaborative marriage planning. You plan for success, you also plan for separation. And we're going to come back to this in a second. So here's a question, panel. It's very common in the startup of a collaborative file in a separation agreement for one lawyer to recommend 1, 2, 3 other lawyers to the other member of the couple, the separating spouse. In this case, of course, it's the betrothed. Can you think of any reasons why the first collaborative lawyer might or might not offer up names of potential lawyers to the other person in the couple? Is it a good idea? Especially in the challenge arena. I'm not talking about whether it's going to work in the first time around in the collaborative process, because if you get to work with someone you like and trust, then things are going to go swimmingly well, and you're going to have a beautiful contract and hopefully goes into the drawer and never to be seen again. But in the event of a challenge, could that pose a problem that you gave one name for somebody else?
I'll give you my thoughts. We do hear when we work on these types of engagements that one client will say, well, he chose my lawyer, he told me who to go to, and it was already all set up and I didn't have a chance to choose the person that I wanted to. So I think you have to be very careful in terms of, you want to work with someone who you work well with as part of a team, but I think you have to, when you're doing a marriage contract, perhaps you should be very careful, knowing that one of the areas that are challenged are whether or not the person had their own representation, whether or not you are going to be recommending a lawyer.
I definitely agree, and so maybe one way is not to just give one name, bad idea, or say this is who it's going to be. Give at least 3 names, and in the process make it perfectly clear if that person wants, it can and will be somebody else. So, and it may in the end not be a collaboratively negotiated agreement. We know that can happen too. But I think if you make that clear in the beginning, here are 3, and normally I think you would say, with these 3, I expect it to take this much time, and I can tell you it'll be pretty efficient. I know, obviously, because we've worked as a team before and we've seen how it went. So there may be time delays and other costs, maybe yes, maybe no, associated with someone else.
JJ, how much is this much time? I have a rule of thumb and it's 4 months. Either typically before a wedding, a move-in date is a little more flexible than, the I do date. Do you have a rule of thumb?
Yeah, 4 months is definitely there for me. And clients generally think, oh my God, that's so long. I'm thinking 4, and it could be 6. We're just going to see how that goes. But right, so we do have this pressure of the marriage date, and it's got to be done before the marriage date. And although, again, every family is different, 2 weeks ago my client approached me and said, we are getting married in 2 weeks, and I'm not signing anything before the marriage. So we're going to work on this after the wedding.
Yeah.
That's it.
I wonder about how to have the positive energy to negotiate these very difficult and very sensitive terms. And I think the tighter the team, the tighter the contract. So if you have a tight team and a team that has worked together before, and you could recommend somebody, and I'm not dismissing for 1 second the vulnerabilities to the lawyers around that, I just think that the strength of the team will allow for these very awkward and sensitive clauses to be negotiated.
We wouldn't think of starting a collaborative file without a participation agreement. So what does it look like? And is a participation agreement always to be signed?
Yes,
Thank you, JJ.
it really should. This is not a place for shortcuts. This isn't collab light. This should be collab heavy.
Yeah.
The tight team. These are really big problems, and we're looking into the future. We're making projections. We're trying to imagine all sorts of situations. Yeah, you need the collaborative practice agreement for all the same reasons that you have it when you're doing your separation agreement. And so what are they? What are those reasons? From the lawyer's point of view, everything we do in that collaborative practice agreement leads to an agreement that the client is truly committed. And once they're committed, again, it's not likely to be resiled. So that agreement calls for full financial disclosure. It calls for a discussion of every single issue that a client thinks is important. So they're going to be heard. And it calls for respect in the negotiation, and certainly no undue pressure. So it has all of the right ingredients. And what's wrong with having people commit to that from the beginning?
So my question then is for you, JJ. If part of the PA is that in the event that the negotiations in a separation agreement don't succeed, that neither lawyer is available to assist in another process, including litigation, how do you adapt that to a user-friendly negotiation where, at worst, if they don't negotiate it, they are either not getting married or they may be changing lawyers. So what are you taking yourself out of that the lawyer can't assist in? And on that, if you get to the end and they sign a marriage contract and 2 years later they go sideways, that negotiation was successful and complete. Can they come back to the council in some other process in the challenge? So what does it look like? What's actually in this PA?
So from the lawyer's perspective, the PA has the clause, you can't litigate. You can't litigate these issues. What are these issues? How they're going to separate. So if the time comes when they do separate, it's the same rule. You're just not going to litigate. Now, you can help them on a collab or maybe throughout a mediation process, but you can't be an adversary. And in that respect, it's really fundamentally the same thing. In this process of trying to come to an agreement on the marriage contract, if they decide not to be together, I would think that's it. And the same rules apply. Whatever discussions you did have were confidential, and your documentation is confidential.
What if a disclosure has been exchanged and the lawyers believe the parties are on the same page? Does there always need to be a group meeting? What if there are full releases, full waivers? Are there any benefits to having a meeting? And that's, I guess, a two-pronged question. First issue would be going into the contract and assuming that the marriage is going to work, should the parties be together in the same room to talk about it? And if the relationship goes pear-shaped and someone challenges it, did it matter that there wasn't a meeting when everybody was on the same page and disclosure was exchanged? So should there always be a meeting, and is that one of the protocols? Because if we're going to be setting out protocols for this kind of contract, are they always the same? And do they need to be followed? And if not, why not?
I cannot imagine a downside to having such a sensitive meeting. I can't imagine what would be a bad use of time for the family to be collecting themselves, the family being this couple, to collect themselves, to talk about why they entered into this, why this was important to them, how they understand it, how it will benefit their family, that they articulate their values and their beliefs about what they are entering into, and that it's completely recorded. I can't imagine the downside to that. And so I would say to not skimp on the meeting, it would make no sense to me.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think that you would want to have a meeting. I would think that if the marriage contract was going to be challenged, it would be very telling that there was a meeting, that the contract was reviewed, that everyone sat around a table, perhaps that there were notes taken in terms of what was discussed, that you walked through the agreement and everyone was there, questions were answered. I also think, again, the opportunity to have everyone around the table in terms of making sure everyone's on the same page is invaluable.
So I agree. We need the meeting.
Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna come back to you now, JJ. You're approaching these agreements in a kind of a new and novel way. Can you explain to our audience how the idea was conceived, what the approach involves, why we might want to think about doing it this way? So help us understand.
So the OCLF had a conference in Kingston, and there was a workshop, and Dennis Lerner came from New York lawyer, to talk to us about this collaborative marriage planning. And I think he and his partner prepared for about an hour and a half presentation to persuade the Canadian group that this would be a good idea. And as I recall, within 20 minutes, everybody said, "What a wonderful idea. Where are your precedents? Let's get started." So there was a wave of support at the time, and it just instinctually felt like this is the right thing for collaborators to do, and this is how we are different, and how the collaborative process is different than the regular process. So it's really about that thing, about we have, the collaborative practice professionals have a pretty good building code for how to build a relationship. Now that's a pretty amazing thing. You know, yes, we're every day we're dealing with a demolition derby and picking up the pieces, but you know, we've done some analysis and we've got a pretty good idea where things were going wrong, how people's emotions are tied to their money, and how they need to sort out both of those things, and how they need to sort out how they feel about their rights and their obligations. So I go to that conference. I don't have any precedent, and about a year and a half later, client walks in, and you know, she's been a client for a number of years, and She says, me and my partner want to bring our relationship to another level. We want to commit. We've been together now for 3 years, and we want to make a commitment. So JJ, how does that work? How does that work? So, okay, so on the one hand, I give her the traditional adversarial negotiation, and that doesn't sit too well with her. And I say, well, we might try to go interest-based. Yeah. And then I said, or we can plan. I got some really great people who can help you plan a successful relationship. And this client believes in the power of professionals. She just does. And so does her partner. And so they get back to me and they say, okay, and how much? I said, I can't tell you how much, but I will tell you in 2 weeks. What? So I knew her. I knew their circumstances. I had some sense of her partner. And we gathered up a team of a family professional and a financial professional. And we met. And we talked about what would this look like, how many meetings we thought that would take, and what would the price be. These people were of relatively modest means. Every dollar counts, and quite frankly, they just needed a number. Otherwise, they couldn't go forward, and you can't blame them. So we gave them a number, and we worked at it. And some truly amazing things happened. So these clients were very high functioning communicators. Let me put it to you that way. So we know these people. They go to see the family professional, and I'm telling them, we're just sort of going to check, make sure everything's okay. Well, everything's fine. And there were a number of issues that they had not talked about, and that they had assumed that the other one thought the same way they did, but the other one didn't. And they were really curious and happy, frankly, to learn about it. They were in a safe place. They were planning the success of their relationship, so they were feeling open to discussing the issues, and they came out of that much stronger. And then they met, and at the same time, they're meeting with a financial planner and put the planner to work, or the financial neutral put them to work to a great, great extent. And they came up on their own with a 5-year plan, because they said, we can predict 5 years. We if anything happened really bad in these 5 years, and we're pretty much following this plan that we've got, we're good. We're good with that. They were really, really pleased. And at the signing meeting, there were high fives and hugs and pictures. And when they threw a party with their own community, they circulated those pictures. And frankly, they circulated the agreement. So, and in that agreement, there were sections, all right, lawyers.
Take a breath.
Take a breath. There were sections that they wrote themselves about what their life would be and what they were promising as to how they would move forward. And yes, that included a monogamous relationship. And so, and the respect of the other to have friends and to maintain other relationships. These were pretty bright people. Anyways, they worked all of that out, and we had them put it in different subject matters. We had them put that into the agreement. And yes, we did talk about how the fact that one has a house and now the house was going to go into joint tenancy, and if they separated, how would the equity be divided? We did the legal stuff too, and we talked about support, and it was relatively simple and relatively easy on the legal side if you're planning for 5 years and people are really dealing with their relationship and feeling much, much more secure about going forward. So the principles that we get from this is there was full financial disclosure. They had an opportunity to address those issues which were clearly very important to them, and it was important to them to talk about how they would build their relationship. And that included, my mom is aging and she's getting ill, or she could be getting ill in the next 5 years. Yeah, it's true, we talked about that. Well, I may have to go live with her in Ottawa. You know what? You do that, and I will quit my job, and I will go find another job in Ottawa, and I'll work for the both of us. Because family relationships are important. They're important to me, and I know they're important to you. And so they thought of, with the help of the family professional, they thought of what would be the stressors and how they would go about dealing with them. And they made commitments to each other. And now the lawyers will say, well, what if they break some of those terms in the family plan? Right? So because they have a 5-year life plan. So what if they break that? I'm all worried as a lawyer, what's that going to do? Is that going to vitiate the agreement? I stop, and I think the most important promise that usually people think they're making in the marriage is that they will be faithful. And what does the law do about breaching that term? Does it affect support? No. Does it affect the division of property? No. But we're all worried about what if somebody doesn't go to Ottawa. I mean, okay, guess what, folks? Hey, you know what? And so you talk to them about that and you make it clear. So you know that if there's a breach of this, the rest of your agreement still stands. Oh, thank you very much. That's what we wanted. We don't want to lose the certainty because one of the things that was important to us didn't happen. We still want that certainty. So the lawyers, okay. Anyways, positive experience, building on the strengths and the tools that our professions have, delivering something way more than any competitor does, and really delivering the goods that we're promising. When people separate, we kind of promising that their lives are going to be better because they've worked with us, that they will have a better working and functional relationship, especially if they have kids. And so we're helping them get through this next stage of their lives. And you do the same thing in the marriage contract. And I find it fascinating from the financial perspective that it would be a good idea to regroup every 5 years. And by the way, these people knew that at the end of the 5 years, there was no more contract.
Right.
They were in the hands of the law.
Yeah, that's an incentive.
And so they were very clear that if they wanted to get things done their own way, they would be back in 5 years, and they were fine with that. They were really good. So all the families are different, and sometimes it's a 5-year plan that's the answer, and sometimes maybe 10, or sometimes it's just the full long term. At the end of the day, they have to talk about their relationship and how it's going to succeed. Any comments?
You've spoken so eloquently about the transformative nature of collaborative, and when you have the best file ever, even when they're so hard, and you all sit back and you say, oh my God, look at the job we did. We didn't just get the job done, we transformed, or we facilitated to transform this family, and that's what I hear out of this story.
It is.
JJ, can you share the precedent and redact the names with people in the audience who might be interested in seeing what such a contract looks like?
Sure.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Lovely.
It's all over.
They were actually interviewed.
The
The couple were interviewed on CBC and about their experience and what they thought of it. So they were proud.
I'm going to we're going to do a Q&A for a few minutes,
Yes, my name is Natalie, and I'm a family law lawyer in Toronto. And my question is around financial disclosure. Vivian and I had a side conversation before the start of the panel, and I don't see any definitive answer from case law of what is the level of disclosure that's required. It feels to me, and I'd like to hear your opinion, that a ledger with an accurate statement of the worth of the family plus some information that's accurate about income is sufficient, and there's no requirement in law to have a document brief and business valuations, even real estate valuations, so long as the value is found to have been accurate and the disclosure was truthful. Do you have, perhaps to JJ, have you done some case law where you think that a statement is not enough and we must have financial disclosure? I mean, with the attached statements and business valuations.
Right. So I would say the case law doesn't say that in every instance you need it. And so a lot of it is, and will eventually become a judgment call, but it's a judgment call in the very beginning. So that is to say, it will depend on the individual circumstances of the parties and how much of a difference you might reasonably expect that a full valuation might form. Again, if you've planned for a successful exit, then you need enough information, reliable information, to say, okay, maybe I'm giving up support and I'm getting this much in exchange, and I think that'll be good enough given the lifestyle that I can predict we're going to have. I think under those circumstances you would want some verification as the lawyer that if that's at least that level of disclosure is ongoing enough to provide for that financial plan. One very interesting thing in terms of family dynamics and financial disclosure is that we know a lot of marriages do break down when people don't know what's going on with the other person's finances. And so, just saying, in your marriage contract, you might have ongoing financial disclosure. That's just a term to keep people healthy or to keep their relationship healthy. And you may say, here are the joint accounts and here are the sole accounts. And for people who don't have so much money, you might say it's your sole account, you're separate as to property, and the person might say, okay, I will not spend more than a certain amount out of this account without first talking to you about it. That's it. I can spend it, I can do what I want, but I won't do it until I talk to you about it. They did that in the agreement, by the way. So and how did that ongoing disclosure, and it seems to me if you have ongoing disclosure in the marriage, you should have pretty good disclosure in the beginning, and what is good enough for the people and is reasonable in terms of expense. But yeah, that clearly now you're thinking with the help of the financial neutral and the family neutral. What are these hot spots that have led to breakdowns, and what can we do about them?
It's Judy Huddard. It's really just a comment, and really picking up on what you said, JJ, and just in terms of the need for the clients to actually check in on their assumptions, because I've not done a collaborative marriage contract or cohabitation agreement, but I think using a lot of the skills that we learn, I'm always now asking my clients, go and check in with your intended and make sure that what you're assuming that you've agreed to, that they agree, and look down the road, right? And particularly, I talk a lot about what happens if you have children, because a lot of the time, if they're younger, it's a huge difference in lifestyle and in their financial situation. And I've had people come in and say, well, we're just going to be separate, we're not going to have support, and blah, blah, blah. And they say, well, yeah, that's nice, but what if 2 years from now you have a child? And what if that child has an illness? Or what if you decide one of you wants to stay home? Do you really feel comfortable with your agreement? And I think having a family professional talking to them about that would be way better than me talking to them about it. So I think this has given me a great idea. So now I want the Lauries in on this stuff. Whether I do a collaborative, whether I can convince them to do that or not, I really think that's so useful to have them give them some help to have that conversation. So thank you for raising that.
I just wanted to share an experience where we did a collaborative marriage contract, and we did go back 2 or 3 times. We had done it, and about a year later, my client called me, who was the wife, and she'd gotten a lot of money in this contract, and it was causing problems between her husband and his grown children, who were really upset at how much she was getting, and it was causing a lot of stress in the family. So she said, I don't want this, and came back to the table. We renegotiated. Then 2 years later, some other things changed. We went to their place. He was in a wheelchair at that time. We sat at the kitchen table. They were joking about they'd had a little tiff the night before, and they're like, well, good thing, because the lawyers are coming in the morning. And they have breakfast for us, the coffee, and now we are going back in 6 months because they're just taking it bit by bit. And it's a very... it just feels, it's lovely, it's loving. They cry at the table about how much they love each other and want to care for the other during illness, but what's that going to look like to the estate? And it's been quite a profound experience to kind of keep coming back and having these held conversations. So I just thought I'd share that little story.
Tom Hamer from Whitby. I want to follow up on what Judith said. I'm at the point in my practice where I'm not quite at the point, but almost at the point where I will not do a marriage contract unless we have a meeting. And what's most important is the goals and interest meeting, really. I haven't yet had a family professional involved, and that'd be the gold standard. But even without, simply sitting down with this couple and testing some of their assumptions, asking them, what is this going to look like for you? And the what ifs. And it is amazing how they haven't thought of a ton of this stuff. And quite often you have people with pre-existing families, it's second relationships, so it can be very, very complex. So that first meeting, I think, is critical. And I think as I leave here tonight, my rule will be no more marriage contracts without having that meeting. And you may not be doing it with a collaborative colleague. And in the last one I did, the other lawyer was not a collaborative lawyer, but really saw the value of having that meeting. And we're having a really good, we're almost done. We've had 3 or 4 meetings. We have financial people working with us, but it's a very positive experience. So yes to the first meeting, and maybe others.
I just have a bit of a more negative spin, and that is, of course, and that is, under what circumstances would you consider not moving forward to act for the client or work with that team? For example, let's say a 22-year-old and a 24-year-old, these are the intendeds, and clearly one of the parents is behind this, but you can sense, and it's not I'm going to speak for myself, I know it's not my place to sense when this marriage is going to last exactly 1 year, right? You know that there's no way this puppy's going to work out. And so do you think, well, do you continue to hang in there to help them through so at least they have a great, what I call it a will for the marriage, they have a great will, they've got a good roadmap for when it inevitably does fail. I know at the very least, I write a very long, some people just do reporting letters. I actually have clients read them before the agreement's signed and then sign the thing themselves so that it's very clear that they've read it and understood it. But under what circumstances would you not even go there?
Well, clearly, when someone is not collaborating, so not providing reasonable disclosure, not really willing to discuss the issues my way or the highway, take it or leave it, that kind of thing would definitely be the end. I can tell you there's perhaps a more I think, maybe the more subtle way, which has happened to me a few times, is where the spouse my client, the spouse, is given a contract drafted by the husband's lawyer, and just sign this. And so, with the help of the collaborative skills, I help the client explore what those issues are and what her life might look like. And this is whether she's, 62 or 26. And so you go through that, and generally my experience has been, I guess we need to work on our relationship. Yeah. So they end up going to see a family therapist and eventually come back, maybe. But that's basically where I help to redirect them to somebody who can truly help. Because at that point, I'm not going to help. And really, I'd rather not have my name on that agreement, and then I'm the witness, and or the person who's been sued or whatever. Anyways, it really is just that I have nothing to offer at that point. There's somebody else who's got way more appropriate skills to deal with this, and we know who they are.
I have a version of that file right now, and it's unearthing all kinds of horrible, devilish secrets and non-secrets and pushy families, and it's very difficult. And so, unfortunately, it's where the couple needs to be at this moment right now. Like it's not about the contract anymore; it's about the relationship. So.
Hi, I'm Jane Hall. My question is about the cost. So when you got together with the family and the financial professional and was able to offer an estimated cost, did you all agree to cap your cost, your billing expense? How did you handle that?
Yeah, okay, so clearly we did. Clearly we thought, okay, we're just dying to do this. We're going to get quite a bit of benefit out of it just in the experience. We need to be courageous. We need to be daring. We need to be a lot of things. And we're going places we've never been before. And are we really going to charge that to the clients? Like, how much of that is on them and how much of it is on us? So you know what? We were good with it. I put in more hours than what I would have billed for. The financial planner financial neutral put in way more hours, sorting all of that out. And I think the other two were the family and the other lawyer were just about on board. So there was some over cost there, not a lot. And it does, though, as a topic, bring to mind what the Simcoe group is doing with their flat fees. And let's face it, folks, if anybody should have a pretty good idea what it's going to cost, it's us. I mean, who else is going to come up with a pretty good estimate? Now, that tool, I'm all in favor of that outcome ready tool, which is basically assessing how settlement ready are these clients. So that's an important thing. And I do think we have a lot to learn. So we've learned from the family professionals what happens to our clients and to people when they separate, and how their brains get prevented from having enough oxygen to problem solve, and the amygdala hijacks. And even better, they've given us a couple of tools to help calm down the clients and bring them back. So I'm dying to hear what the family professionals are going to tell us about people in love and how that affects their ability to think through problems and what the risks are there. So hopefully that'll be another workshop one day.
You've been a terrific audience. Panel, you've been a delight. Thank you for agreeing to join us tonight. Lots of good stuff to think about. We don't profess to think that we have all the answers, but what we know how to do is a good place to start. Start with what you know. Thank you all, and especially JJ, thank you so much for agreeing to participate, for making the trip, from the Great White North, which is only half as far away as I used to live, but still a good drive, and we are delighted to have you here.
Thank you.